Welcome to another episode of How to Be Happier for Entrepreneurs. Hope everyone's having a fantastic day. We have a special guest from Mexico. I have known this guest for many, many years, but we've actually become pretty close in the last 6 months through his life transformation and mine as well. So, welcome to the show, Chris. How are you today, brother?
I'm good. Excited to be with you to add value today.
Awesome, man. Well, I know you've got a lot of value to add, and as we always do, we just hit right out of the bat, right out of the gate with a hard hitting question. So, take us through. Man, your story is really, really inspiring. Could you take us through the challenges and the pressures in your life that led you to rely on Xanax and ultimately the suicide attempt? And what were the key moments that pushed you to seek help?
Yeah. So my story really begins with a lie. Going years back, I had cheated on my wife, and I harbored a secret for many years. And as I look back, that was really the first time that I held on to something at that level. And as I look back on my story, I could see that that was really kind of one of the first dominoes that led to my unraveling. As they say, you're only as sick as your secrets. And so what happened in my particular case is I'd been running companies for about 19 years. And anyone who's listening as an entrepreneur knows there are ups and downs, whether it's 2008 or personal things that happen in your life. And I found myself in a place of just being completely burnt out. And then everything came to a head. I ended up going through a divorce after being with someone for 10 years, a very, very difficult thing. I underestimated that process. And at the time, around that particular time, I had bought an education company. And about a year and a half later, from buying that education company, finalizing the divorce, I found myself with nothing left in the tank, zero. And unfortunately, with the company that I bought, I ran into some challenges, and I just was not in the right headspace to run a new company. And I was finding myself failing and having to go back with my tail tucked between my legs to basically take this company that I had purchased and go back to the person I had purchased it from to say that things are not going well and I need help. And I found myself I was actually out in Portugal. And I was taking a week or two just to breathe from everything, just to try to get away from it all. And I'll never forget the call that I was on. It was myself, my COO. And on top of that, we had my business consultant at the time. And the goal initially was to try to navigate a difficult transition that we were going to go to. But the conversation ended up being with a hard-hitting truth. And that is, Chris, if you wait to sell in 6 months, this is going to be an absolute nightmare. And if you sell now, it's going to be really bad, but you got to get out. And I remember getting off that call, and I remember the feeling in my stomach that set in. And I remember thinking to myself, I have no strength to navigate what is now going to be one of the most difficult challenges of my business career. And so if you fast forward a few weeks, probably about 6 weeks, I found myself finalizing the sell back to the person that I bought it from. And the last week of the sale happened to coincide with me being in Honduras doing a building project with basically a mastermind or a brotherhood of men that I was leading. This was a group about vulnerability and radical honesty, yet myself as the leader, I was fearful to really expose who I was. And this is a lot about what we're going to talk about today. Why was that fear there? What kept me from being in a place to lead with honesty, even though that's what I wanted in this community that I built. And I started having anxiety attacks in Honduras. And when I started having anxiety attacks in Honduras, we needed to figure out something to do because basically I couldn't sit still. My body started shaking. And just so you understand, I've never had anxiety attacks. I have no pre-mental health issues, never taken prescription drugs in my life.
Wow.
But what was decided in that moment was, well, he's having anxiety. Let's get some anti-anxiety medicine. It's what you do. It's Western thinking. Take some medication to help. And so we went down and got some Xanax from a pharmacy. And just like Mexico or anywhere else, you can just buy it over the counter. No telling what was in this Xanax. This is not from the US. And so as I took it, unfortunately, I had a very adverse effect. Within 48 hours, I went into onset depression from the medication. Now, as I tell you the story, I don't have an understanding that this is the medication. I'm interpreting it through my circumstances. Like I
Right.
just have a lot going on. I didn't understand that it was exacerbating it. And then within about 4 days, I was working out on the roof, helping do this building project while simultaneously dealing with the sale of this company, under immense stress, dehydrated, just not in a good place. And I went into what are called benzos hallucinations. Now, I won't or understand anything I'm about to tell you about benzos, but when I say benzos or benzodiazepines, I'm referring to the family of drugs of Xanax, Valium, Klonopin, Ativan. People have heard of these.
Right.
And as I'm on the roof working, I basically have a hallucination of three things. Now, I'm not seeing things, I'm not hearing things, but I am being guided internally, like I move into the place of the observer. And three things happen on that roof. Number one, I hear that basically, Chris, your life is over. It's done. There's absolutely no way out of this situation. Now, that wasn't true. I had a plan in place. It was going to suck. But this is what benzos do. They exacerbate everything. And so in that moment, I felt there was no way out. The second thing that began to happen is my life started playing out before me, like different moments. And this self-condemnation and hatred set in that I had never experienced before. And what I began to hear is basically, Chris, you're a complete fraud. Everything in your life you have ever done has been out of ill will. And on top of that, you're just a piece of shit and you don't deserve to live. And then for the first time in my life, the third thing that happened was I started to get massive suicidal ideations. Now, for those that don't know, and I didn't know at the time, benzos for certain people can create large amounts of suicidal ideation. And I heard it as clear as day. It was like marching orders. When you go back tonight to the hotel and everyone goes to sleep, you're going to grab the couple boxes of Xanax you have. You're going to swallow all of them and get into a pool to kill yourself.
Wow. Whew. That's harsh, man. That is like deep. That is like hits me.
Mm.
And I've heard this before, but hearing it again, it's just like, oh my Lord, that's some powerful stuff.
Yeah. And so I did. And luckily my friends, and these are my brothers, part of this brotherhood and guys I've known for years, heard me thrashing around in the water. Now I blacked out. I don't remember it, but they had to fish me out of a pool in the middle of the night. You can imagine what that felt like for them. And when I woke up, I was in a Honduras hospital. And all I know is after getting my my stomach pumped, basically I came to, and I remember, Brad, the shame and the guilt that came over me, because I realized what I just did. I just tried to take my own life while basically building a church in Honduras on my own brotherhood trip. And I couldn't fathom why I did what I did. And it wouldn't be for 7 months until I understood the underlying driver under this, obviously, which is benzodiazepines. But at the time, I owned it. It's what I did. It was the choice that I made. And so when I got back to the States to be with my family, my body was convulsing and I couldn't formulate sentences. And everyone was deeply scared because we didn't understand what was happening. Was I underwater too long? Did that amount of benzos do something to my brain? Did I have potential brain damage because no one knew how much water I took in? So now all of a sudden there's these variables. We're not quite sure why Chris is responding this way, but it's not good. We need to send him to get help. And so we did. And I went to one of these, what are considered like high luxury facility rehabilitation centers. And what I'm about to share is my experience. I cannot speak on behalf of all rehabilitation centers. I can only tell you my story. But when I got there, and I woke up in the bed at the facility, my body's convulsing. I can't formulate sentences and I don't know what's wrong. And so they said, we need to send you in to see a psychiatrist immediately. And so I went in and he saw the way I was responding and he said, we need to put you on medication. And I remember communicating, I've never taken medication, prescription. And obviously he said, this is what you need to do. And I grew up in a family where you trust the doctors and you take the medication. It's what you're told. And I walked out of there on 5 prescription drugs: lithium,
Wow.
Prozac, baclofen, antipsychotics, the works.
Good Lord.
And so now I have even more variables in play. So I can't split test and understand what's going on because it's just getting more layered. Now, the one thing that didn't happen, which is what should have happened, was they didn't continue me on a benzos. So now I'll begin a journey of going into basically benzo withdrawals.
Oh
And to
my
put
Lord.
that into perspective, benzo withdrawals are worse than heroin withdrawals.
Yeah, I've heard they're just brutal to get off of.
Brutal. So what happens is basically when you try to get off benzos, for some people, they take over the firing of your neurotransmitters. So when you get off, your brain doesn't pick back up the responsibility. So basically, I can't function. And unfortunately, my lack of functioning is perceived as not trying within this community. And they diagnosed me, I'll never forget, with severe anxiety, severe depression, and psychosis. Now, those are just primary side effects of benzodiazepines, but the doctors communicated to me and my family that I was the origin of this. So now I have these doctors telling me this, and I know nothing about these things. I hear about them, but I don't know what it is to experience, depression or anxiety or psychosis. And so about after a week of not being able to perform within this facility and show up, because basically I was locking myself in the room because I couldn't function, and I felt like the biggest pansy in the world, right? Everyone is rooting me on and I can't function, and I don't understand why.
Chris, let me jump in. Let me jump in and say something, because that was that. I mean, you've said an immense amount of powerful stuff, but what you went through in that experience of being, this is what Western medicine does: diagnose, label, and give you drugs. Be told that you have a disorder. Well, not only you, but hundreds of million Americans are on a antidepressant or anti-anxiety drug. And I don't know the number that should or shouldn't be on it, but I can assure you it's not 100 million. It probably should be less than 10,000. There's nothing, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, I can relate. There's nothing wrong with your brain. There's nothing wrong with your brain. Your brain is actually doing what it thinks it needs to do to protect you from something it thinks is more harmful. And we'll get into that more as we go, and we'll talk about the subconscious mind. But I just had to say that if anyone's listening and you've been told by a doctor, you've got this disorder, this disorder, this disorder. No, your brain has no disorder. It is doing exactly what it should be to protect you from something that it thinks is worse. But when we figure out this thing that thinks it's worse, it's always an untruth that was formed at some point in your life to protect you from some stress or trauma.
I agree. And that was my experience of my journey. So to kind of begin to fast forward and wrap up the story, because I think the most valuable part of the story is what I learned from the story itself. But I was 2-man escorted to a higher facility. After about 7 to 8 days of being in benzos, I went into acute state. And in the new facility I went into a 2-week hallucination that I was part of a sting operation, and the FBI was after me and going to put me in prison for the rest of my life.
Wow.
I believe that the patients were undercover FBI. They were filming everything I was doing, and it was being broadcasted to the world, and people were telling each other to turn on the news. Chris is being taken down in a sting operation. That went on for about 2 weeks. And fortunately, I got out of it because the therapist there stopped being a doctor for a minute, and she started being a mom, and she wrapped her arms around me and she started crying, and she whispered in my ear, "Chris, we're not after you. We're here to help you." And the sincerity that I saw in her was like a seed that was planted. And the way I would describe unraveling it would be like watching The Sixth Sense. You watch the entire movie and you get to the end and realize Bruce Willis is dead. And then you have the key as they replay the movie to understand you misinterpreted it all. And that's what happened. And it scared the hell out of me that my brain could do that. And while I was there, they put me on Ativan, which is the strongest benzos there is. And I talked my way out of the facility because now I'm on a drug that's allowing my brain to function again, right? Because when you're stuck, if you take benzos, your neurotransmitters start firing again. But as I left, they said, "We need to taper you off the medication. We'll send you home with everything else except this." And they tapered me off 7 days and sent me home. To put that in perspective, there are people that take 17 months to get off Xanax, and they tapered me 7 days, sent me home to my family, and they did not communicate what was about to happen next. So when I get home, now I'm withdrawing off of Ativan, and I'm on my parents' floor in the fetal position, screaming and crying. It was one of the most painful experiences of my life. What do you do? What do you do in that situation when everyone around you is not educated or informed enough, even myself, to understand what to do? So after that happening for about a week or two, my family and friends decided I should go to another facility. But there was absolutely no way I was going to go back into another facility to be on psych watch. I had people cornering me in a room trying to
Oh,
force feed me medication.
oh,
People
God.
are going up and down the hall screaming and cutting themselves. And like 6 weeks before, I'm in Portugal on vacation.
Oh
My
my,
brain can't fathom the fall, but all I know is there's no way you're going to put me in another place, because the entire time we're under the assumption that I had a mental breakdown. We're not understanding that I'm in benzos withdrawal and that benzos can do this. And so anyway, I come back to Tulum. It's where I live. And obviously, I just wanted to get back to a place of normalcy. Now, this was against everyone's will, and understandably, because coming back to Tulum meant that I was going to be by myself and away from my family. And my thought process was, if I had a mental breakdown, maybe I can snap back into place by getting home and going to the beach and going to the gym. Like, I'm just so desperate because we're a couple months into this process now. And when I get back, I'm in terrible shape and I'm completely suicidal. And I start to reach out to my Tulum friends. And the very first person I reach out to is a friend who's a naturopathic doctor. And I just want to start getting off the medication as fast as I can. Now, everyone's telling me not to. When I left the facility, the number one thing they said 10 times to me was, Chris, medication management is everything. You have to keep taking all this medication. But I just intuitively felt, I don't understand what's wrong with me. I have too many drugs in my system. So we used a lot of natural vitamins and minerals to get off of everything. But the thing I couldn't get off of was the benzos. And at the time, I was in so much pain. Basically, it feels like you're being tortured alive. So after about 2.5 months, biologically, I'm breaking down. I started playing around with street drugs to see anything I could get relief, but alcohol didn't work, psilocybin didn't work, but MDMA did. And MDMA is a serotonin reuptake, which is basically what my brain needed. And when I took it, I didn't get to a position of feeling high. I just felt normal, like I snapped back into place.
wow.
And what would transpire for another 3.5 months, being a total of 7 months, I would get in the most god awful cycle, but it was keeping me alive, of taking MDMA, staying up for 3 to 4 days because it removed the pain, but scared to go to sleep, because when I go to sleep and basically take Xanax again to fall asleep, not understanding I'm resetting a cycle, I just know I can't get off of it, I'll wake up and benzos withdrawal again, my body convulsing and shaking, and that will happen for as many days as I can handle it before I go back. Now, during this time, I pushed everyone out of my life because the conversations were just circular. Chris, you just need to go to Florida and go to another home. Didn't want to go to another home. And so I reached out at that time to a girl that I trusted, and she ended up being an absolute angel. She's a medicine woman, and I felt like she could handle the situation, because most people couldn't last a week or two in this situation, which is understandable. People don't know how to hold space at that level. And she dropped her life, and for 3.5 months, she took care of me full time. I was basically like a 5-year-old child. I developed agoraphobia. I couldn't leave the house. I got emaciated. My body started shutting down from this cycle. But at the end of 7 months, she sat me down and she said, Chris, I have the solution. And I'm getting to a place where I can't continue to be within this situation with you, which is understandable after 3.5 months of this process. And at 7 months before, I bought a gun with bullets. It was sitting in my house. So my deal was, I'll get whatever I can out of this life and I'll just end it, because I didn't want to die, but biologically, I can't take the pain anymore. It's too excruciating. And she said, Chris, the solution is to microdose ayahuasca breakfast, lunch, and dinner, half a teaspoonful. I do not believe you're or had a mental breakdown. I believe that you're in benzos withdrawal. And my mentor in Costa Rica, who helps people and taught me about plant medicine, believes the same thing. And I laughed. I was like, bullshit. There's no way that ayahuasca, again, I've lived in Tulum, so I'm very aware of plant medicine, but I held that culture at length because I felt it was woo-woo. But I had no choice, because she was going to walk out the door and I was going to grab that gun. It was going to be game over. So I did it for her, and I did it because there were no other options on the table. And so I went in my room, and for 6 days, I went through the most god-awful experience of my life. I quit taking the Xanax, and I quit taking the MDMA, and my body started contorting. I started passing out and disassociating because the pain level was so high. I was beating myself in the face.
Whoa.
And about 6 days of being delirious, I passed out and I woke up and I was lucid for 90 minutes. And then from day 7 to day 15, my health doubled every day, and I was basically cured. And I remember scanning my body after 2 weeks. No depression, no anxiety, no psychosis. what the hell just happened? I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe, because I thought, and the hell within the hell was, I thought I was permanently disabled, that I was going to be like this for the rest of my life. And now all of a sudden I'm well. And so I began to read medical journals and to study and to research. And I understood that I was in a withdrawal from benzos for 7 months. And what happened was that the particular ayahuasca I took acted as a mediator between the benzos and my brain. And basically it passed the baton back so that my brain would start functioning again. And basically neurologically, it saved my life.
So Chris, they diagnosed you with depression, anxiety, psychosis. Do you have any of those three today?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. So did you ever have any of those three?
No, I mean, I would say that I've experienced anxiety, and I think we all experience depression to some extent. But if you're talking about from a generalized, like chronic depression, anxiety, no, but I've had circumstantial moments of it. But no, I've not had any pre-mental health issues in my life.
Yeah. So the title of today's podcast is The Performance Trap, Why It Exists and How to Escape It. Before we get into the lessons learned, or maybe the lessons are going to be woven in here, tell us what that is. What is the performance trap, and why does it exist, and how do we escape it?
So I began to have to understand two parts of my story. We just talked about part 2, which is what happened when I put that pill in my mouth. But my real interest began in the first part of the story of how did I get to a place that I pushed myself so hard that I started having anxiety attacks, and we needed to get anti-anxiety medicine. Like, that's on me. That was the culmination of my choices. So why did I drive myself so hard? And so I began to get trauma informed to understand my story. And basically I would describe it as this: we all have these behaviors in our lives that we're not happy with. We do things like we're workaholics. We use drugs, we use alcohol, we might overeat, we might binge on Netflix, we might lose ourselves in sex, whatever it is, but we have these behaviors and we feel shame and we feel guilt for them. But I like what Dr. Gabor Mate says. The question is not why the behavior, but why the pain. Because we judge people when they have these behaviors, and we judge ourselves, not understanding that how in the world would we judge each other for wanting relief from pain? That's such a normal thing. And the pain manifests in different ways. Initially, it just might, like, things are off, or sadness, but then it culminates into things like depression and anxiety. And we don't understand why we feel this way. So we medicate it. We numb, we suppress, right?
We shut down.
We shut down.
We run, we hide.
We don't want to feel those things. Who wants to naturally feel pain? And we don't understand where it's coming from. It doesn't make sense, but we identify with the pain. That means something is wrong with me, right? And so what I began to understand is underneath that pain is trauma. And I know people don't like that word, or I'll use another one, childhood wounds, right? I think a lot of people feel like, is this whole thing about trauma? And I'll tell you, based on my experience, it is.
100%, I agree. And I stopped using the word trauma because people think that in order to have been negatively affected as an adult, that you had to be locked in a cage or sexually molested. That you don't have to. As your buddy Gabor Mate says, there's big T trauma. That's what that is. But there's little T trauma. Your sister comes home from the hospital from being born, and you think because mommy and daddy are paying attention that mommy and daddy love her more, and you're not lovable.
Exactly. The way I would refer to it is there's whack and lack trauma. Whack trauma is very obvious, right? I was abused. Lack is, it was a slow thing that I did not receive through childhood over time. So basically it's emotional neglect for whatever reason. And it's harder to see because sometimes you can have good intentioned parents in a childhood that looks great, but you don't understand that underneath it, there was an emotional neglect that was happening, because a lot of this is unconscious.
Yes. And Chris, and if you do have, just like you said, but I'm going to say it a different way, if you do have these negative behaviors, and you just listed a bunch of them: overeating, shutting down, drinking, porn, working too much, depression, anxiety, it is your body's attempt at running from pain that you might even not know that exists or not. That is from, again, not every time, but 99% of the time is from your childhood. So if you're sitting here saying, God, I wonder if that's why I can't stop doing X, Y, and Z, and you want to know if you have these underlying beliefs, do yourself a favor, take 3 minutes and go to unlocklimitlessyou.com and take our 3-minute 12-question self-love quiz. And it might be the start of a journey that forever changes your life, like it did with Chris and mine, just throwing that out there.
Absolutely. So I will say that I began to understand that trauma comes predominantly from two places, either what we experienced in our childhood, or there's also what is called inherited family trauma or epigenetics. And epigenetics is the science of how trauma travels through the genes. So you can be experiencing in your life feelings, emotions, behaviors that don't even belong to you. It was unprocessed trauma generationally back. I'll give a prime example of my story. My grandfather committed suicide by driving his car off a bridge when he was 45 years old. My mom killed herself by driving her car into a pole when she was 50. My suicide attempt was at 43. There's no coincidence to that. What was happening in that moment is that that trauma was traveling generationally and never dealt with because my family doesn't talk about it. So I believe that there were two aspects to my suicide attempt. There was obviously the benzos, which was a key aspect, but I also believe that there was a current of inherited family trauma and behavior that had not been dealt with that manifested in my life at the point at which I was losing everything because I was scared. And so what I will tell you is underneath the trauma, I've come to realize that for all of us, there's this core belief, a core sentence, and unconsciously it's driving so much of what we do. And this core sentence, we all have some version of it, but we pick it up somewhere in childhood or we inherit it. And the core sentence is this: I'm not enough. I'm not enough. And I began to realize that that deep-rooted belief in myself that was unconscious was driving me into a performance-based self-esteem. Because if I'm not enough, I have
Me
to
too.
wake up every day. Yeah, I have to wake up every day and I have to prove myself to
Me
myself,
too. Yep.
to the people around me, my family, to people I don't even know and like.
Yep. Amen. I did it for
So
47 years.
I did as well. And then that's what drove me. And so what I began to understand is the journey is, first of all, to become conscious of this. My particular version of that sentence is I'm inadequate. And this inadequacy drove everything that I did. And here's the irony of it. Because I was functioning from a low vibrational frequency of inadequacy, which was also fear, shame, and guilt, I would sacrifice my health, relationships, my well-being, everything around me to not feel that way.
Me too.
Then I would get to a place of success, and because I was being driven by inadequacy, I didn't feel adequate for it, so I'd self-sabotage.
Me too.
Or I created a roller coaster of success, and I see this amongst a lot of my peers. And basically, it's a performance-based self-esteem, and it's a dangerous place to function from. And going through my healing process, I began to realize that there is a more healthy way to function as an entrepreneur. And I will overcome the first objection that comes up. Well, that got me to where I'm at. It drove me. And I agree, it will drive you.
I hear that all the time, Chris.
It will cost you. But what I'm going to tell you is what got you here won't get you there. And to operate from a higher vibrational frequency of love and peace and wholeness is an entirely different operational system. But here's the deal. You'll accomplish what you want to because you'll finally be able to answer the question, how much is enough? What is enough? How many deals in my portfolio, et cetera? Because you can't answer the question, how much is enough, if you don't believe you're enough.
Chris, I used to remember being at the gym, and on the months that Express Home Buyers was making a lot of money, I'd dance around the gym and be on top of the world. When we were not making money, I would feel way, way too self-conscious to dance. And now I dance. I mean, we're doing well month after month, but even if we weren't, like that's what's changed. It's not, I don't tie my self-worth to my net worth anymore. I thought that by making a bunch of money, it was going to bring me worthiness and happiness. And let me assure you, it won't ever bring you money, worthiness, and happiness. Just look at all the people who are not with us anymore that had more money than they knew what to do with.
Agreed. I mean, I think if I were to sum up one of the key things I understood and to know is I'm not what I have. I'm not what I do. I'm not what they think. Now, that's not news to anyone that's listening, but I will tell you, it is one thing to know it. It is another to experience and feel that every day. And the litmus test of whether or not you actually feel that is, do you wake up every day feeling like you have something to prove? Or do you wake up every day not feeling that way? And that's the true litmus test of whether it's gone the long journey, which is the longest journey we have to take as men, is from our head to our heart, because we have to go through the wasteland that exists between there, which is this pain and this trauma and everything that exists us to get to a place of actually feeling whole. but that is a very difficult journey for us to take because it's
And
painful.
if you wake up trying to prove yourself, that means you're not enough. And there's no amount of anything that will ever make it enough. No money, no sex, no women, no cars, no boats, no vacations, no titles, nothing. And then, but when you start to live in the truth that you are enough, isn't it freeing? Like we had ourselves in this invisible prison, right? We just ran out of that prison and ran down the road like Shawshank Redemption, heading to Mexico. So, Chris, what do you do now? Like you've gone through this incredible story, you've learned all these lessons. What are you doing with all of it now?
Yeah. So my story has a lot of layers, right? It's a story about big pharma. It's a story about plant medicine. It's a story about, the performance trap, everything we've discussed. One of my favorite parts of the story is, I mean, I went through the paper shredder. I went through a complete deconstruction of my life. I lost my businesses. I lost my reputation in a sense. I lost my financial status. I lost my sanity. I lost it all. And when all of that got destroyed, I got destroyed. But on the other side of it, what was to come from this experience, one of the most beautiful parts of the story to me is that the brotherhood in which I always felt, because I'm a community builder, I help men feel. I'm able to create resonance among men and to help them get out of isolation and stress, which is dangerous because being in isolation is not good for your heart. The heart thrives in community. It doesn't, thrive in being alone. And so I'm so grateful that the brotherhood has come back around and has come back into being because the men that were a part of that, a core, continue to want brotherhood and they don't want to be isolated. So I feel much more equipped because now you have a leader that's functioning from a place of adequacy and wholeness and
Wow.
needing to feed off of this thing in order to feel good about who I am because it is not my identity. And the pain that I went through is an experience and has provided a lot of understanding of how I see the world and to help men get out of, and I'll use your language, but the way that I say it is a prison of their own design because they're walking around smiling on the outside and broken on the inside. If you've been to enough masterminds, it's all bullshit, right? We are hurting and we are in pain. And so now I run a brotherhood. It was originally called Multipliers. But now it's called Simplifiers. And I think that captures it all. And basically, we are a brotherhood that helps men create the lives they want inside and out to basically become the men that they feel ashamed for not being. Because even though you're succeeding in your business by financial standards, some listening are, some are failing, but those that are, for the most part, you're failing at home. You're failing in your relationships. And that's a very difficult thing because you get patted on the back at the mastermind, but you don't feel like you're patting yourself on the back at home because you don't feel, you're emotionless, you've shut it down, and people, particularly wives and kids, can't have a relationship with an emotionless man.
Yeah, and here's the most important part, I think, is that none of this is your fault. It's your brain's attempt at solving something it believes is more painful. And when you can figure that thing out and show your brain that it's not true, you are worthy, you are enough, then everything changes in your life. And if you take that self-love quiz and you get a, lack of self-love or mild self-love, it's not just affecting one area of your life. It affects every single area of your life because you can't have a deeply connected relationship. You might be making a lot of money. Some people are able to pull it off, but you can also lose a lot of money like I did. Your health probably isn't great because if you don't love yourself, you're not taking care of yourself. And it goes on and I mean every area of your life. So it's not like when you fix this one thing, all of the areas of your life become better. I've seen it, Chris. Now you're living it these last however many months. It's a beautiful thing. And everyone has the ability to get there, no matter where you are suffering wise or hurting wise. It doesn't matter. I mean, look at you, Chris. You couldn't get any lower, right? And then look, you've just risen from the ashes and now you're helping people do the same thing. It's really a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Well, I think we're going to have you back on because there's about 26 other questions I wanted to ask you that I didn't, but that was absolutely phenomenal. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to leave the audience with that you think would be valuable?
Yeah, if you're listening, I think what comes up is like, where do I begin? Like practically, like what someone's listening and hearing what you're saying and I'm saying, and they feel like, wow, you're reading my mail. So what does that mean that I do? So a couple initial steps is, number one, you have to get out of isolation. Isolation is a dangerous place to be, in your own echo chamber. And I know it's difficult because we isolate because we're ashamed and we're embarrassed, and we live in a hyper masculine American culture where to express emotion and feeling is considered to be weak. But weakness is running and hiding from this. It's not moving through it. And then the second thing is making that decision. It means you have to move into radical honesty. And I know how scary it is to be vulnerable. We love, as Brene Brown says, the vulnerability in other people, but we hate it. We hate it in ourselves. And so you have to get to a place of being radical honesty. And then from there, you have to move into getting help. And I caution people, there are a lot of people out there providing help, but there's the right help that's constructive, and then there's parts that are deconstructive. But what I'll let you know listening is there's a lot of ways inward, because this is a journey to go inward, because there are 3 disconnections in our lives. There's disconnection from our parents because of things that have happened, which is basically screwing up, which then makes us disconnected from ourselves, our inability to feel and be connected to our heart, which then disconnects us from community and people around us. And particularly for us as men, is finding resonance with other men. So you have to begin the process of healing to create those 3 connections that must be in your life in order to thrive and to feel joy and to have peace and to feel supported.
Chris, I love it, man. What amazing content and some lessons you've shared. And I appreciate your vulnerability. Where can people reach you if they want to reach you?
Yeah. So I'm off all social media. I've simplified my life tremendously. So I'm done being in the frying pan of stress that I created for 19 years. So if someone is listening, they can go to simplifiersbrotherhood.com, and you can go there for 2 reasons. Either A, you're listening and what I'm saying is resonating with you, and you maybe want to contact me for whatever reason. And so I've spent a lot of time looking and researching different modalities that can help people, or methods or ways. Or number 2, you want to be in a community because you are ready to simplify, and you're ready to begin this journey because you've had enough. You're sick of it, and you're sick of being caught up in this other world that exists that requires you to grind and push and hustle. And you're just like, you're fed up. And so if you want to be in a community in which you don't have anything to prove, and you can be yourself, and it's safe and it's secure to talk about the hard shit, then go to simplifiersbrotherhood.com and we can have a conversation about it.
Thanks, Chris. And if you know anyone who's struggling to the point where they're thinking about taking their life, please reach out to me or Chris. My cell phone is actually on unlocklimitlessyou.com/Brad. Suicide, if we can prevent, any amount of suicide, that would be a beautiful thing. So if you're struggling, if you're suffering, if you know someone, reach out to us. Chris, that was awesome. I appreciate it. Remember, guys, I'm on a journey here to help 1 million people, and I can't do this alone. So if you like this show, please rate it, review it, share it, anything you can do to get the word out. We need your help. So anyway, until next time, love heals all.